What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit the like button and let me know what you think of today's discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit down video. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to get into another very interesting organized crime topic. And on this channel and on my podcast, which can be found in the description below of this video, we've talked about all sorts of people connected to the American Mafia, some of which, though, were not Italian. People like Meyer Lansky, Jimmy Burke, and Joe Watts. Now, there are two things all three of these individuals have in common. Neither of them or none of them were Italian or not fully Italian. And the other thing is, none of them were made members of the Mafia, but they were all awarded the same things a made member was earned. They were respected. They were huge earners. They had the ability to hurt people. And they were respected by a body that was just bigger than they were, the Mafia. Today, we're going to get in to possibly one of the biggest, a man who we don't talk about ever, but we're going to talk about today. The story of one of the most influential numbers runners in the history of New York City, Spanish Raymond Marquez, next on the Sit Down. Raymond Marquez was born in March of 1930 in Harlem, New York. He would grow up in the West Harlem neighborhood, not far from places we know like East Harlem and obviously Central Harlem. Now, Harlem has always been divvied up when it comes to neighborhoods. Now, obviously, if you know anything about Harlem in the really early 1900s, East Harlem was one of the biggest Italian enclaves in America. Central Harlem has most notably been very big with the Black Renaissance in the 10s and 20s. And places like West Harlem, Spanish Harlem, even up into areas near the Bronx, always Spanish areas, Washington Heights, those neighborhoods. Now, Spanish Raymond Marquez's parents were actually Puerto Rican. They had come over in the early 20s from the island that we know of that's so beautiful, that borders and in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. Now, it was said that early on, Raymond Marquez's family would own a grocery store in West Harlem, but it wasn't just food and other necessities that the Marquezes were moving. It was said that early in the 30s, Raymond Marquez's father was actually involved with a small numbers business that kicked up to Vito Genovese. The one thing we know about Harlem, it has always been controlled by the Genovese crime family, whether it's Mike Coppola, Joseph Rayo, Tony Salerno, Genovese himself, Vincent Gigante. Harlem to today is controlled still by the Genovese crime family. And that's where we hear the old West Side moniker. So there's going to be a lot of overplay and interplay between Raymond Marquez and the Genovese crime family. That is something that allowed him to be the biggest Spanish numbers runner ever. Now, look, I know in the comments I'm going to hear about Jose Battle and people like that, the Cubans. Look, I'm not going to dissolve what they did. The truth of the matter, though, was really from the late 40s on, Spanish Raymond was the king of numbers. And we're going to get to his huge empire and his connection with the Genoveses really soon. So early in his life, he understood hard work, but he also knew there was a tinge of illegality going on in the numerous ethnic communities. Look, we have to realize whether it's Italian communities, Spanish communities, Black communities, Asian communities, there is a certain tinge always of illegality, organized crime, underworld figures. Remember, the Mafia and organized crime, regardless of what nationality it is, win the hearts and minds of the people. Most of the people that are coming over from Puerto Rico, Venezuela, Cuba, Italy, Russia, wherever, they hate the government. They don't like the police. They don't trust the government. So people like Spanish Raymond are always going to be looked upon, just the same way a Mafia figure is looked at in Harlem. It's the same thing. In 1947, at the age of 17 and a half, Raymond Marquez would graduate from Old Textile High School in Manhattan. By this point, though, Spanish Raymond was making money at his family's grocery store, but he was also making money as a numbers pickup boy, as he would be called. He would be gathering bet slips and then reporting them in from a runner. He was learning the business, and then he eventually, as many strong-willed people do in business, they rise. We have to understand how big the numbers racket is. And when I say numbers racket, what that means essentially is illegal lotteries. We have to realize that the New York lottery was not really instituted until the 70s, and ethnic communities were all involved with numbers. Numbers really go back to the early 20s. In fact, in Harlem, it's essentially where the numbers running business became huge. People, over the years, like Stephanie St. Clair, people like Joe Rayo, people like Dutch Schultz, all different sorts of people were involved in creating what the numbers racket is. And in places like Black Harlem, Spanish Harlem, numbers were huge. And I'm going to get into how big numbers were in minority based neighborhoods. And let's just say the early 70s here in just a second. By the early 50s, Spanish Raymond Marquez had earned his way up to basically running his own numbers racket. He had established people below him, he had banks all around Harlem, and he was becoming not only a successful individual, but he was becoming pretty rich too. It didn't come, though, until really the mid to late 50s. In the early 50s, it was said that Raymond Marquez would be a young husband with small children living in the area of 95th and Broadway in Harlem, essentially between the Upper West Side and Harlem, basically Manhattan. By the mid to late 50s, Spanish Raymond Marquez is starting to create more and more territory and controlling larger swaths of area of numbers banks. He not only controlled certain areas of Spanish Harlem, but he was working in tandem with Black, Jewish, and Italian numbers runners. Look, if you were doing business in Harlem in the 50s, the top level people you were kicking up to, whether you were Jewish, Black, whatever, was the Genovese crime family. Again, they have held territory since the 1900s in Harlem. This is where the mafia in this country was literally born. When you go back to Giuseppe Morello, the patriarch of the mafia in America, he was in Harlem, 116th Street crew. That is going back to the early hundreds. So they've always had a foothold. And early on, as I said, Spanish Raymond's father's kicking up to Vito Genovese and people like Joe Rayo. But it was said that Spanish Raymond Marquez in the 50s was very close to Trigger Mike Coppola and Joe Rayo himself. He was kicking up proceeds, Spanish Raymond, from his numbers business to the high-end bidders. By this point also, his brothers and extended family are now working under him. And by the late 50s, Spanish Raymond is considered an underground kingpin figure in the numbers business. Now, he was able to grow his business without the hassle of worrying about mafia protocol. So he lived the best of both worlds. He was able to operate freely. He had to kick up 5%, but 5% is a small token. You don't have to deal with mob politics. You still have somewhat of a protection. People like Coppola, Rayo, eventually Fat Tony, they understand that working in tandem is way better than warring. Why war when we control everything? We've controlled everything for hundreds of years, and you're going to kick up to us. You can operate freely, and we won't bother you. You can control as much territory as you want. Really, things were starting to be good for Spanish Raymond by the late 50s. He had also, by this point, become a father. He had several sons and daughters. Now, in 1958, Spanish Raymond Marquez was implicated in the murder of a Black numbers runner called David Peters. This is according to a congressional file in the late 60s. Now, from what I understand, a Black numbers runner, this guy David Peters, he was trying to muscle into certain areas of Raymond Marquez's control. Something happens, some sort of beef, a physical altercation happens. Raymond Marquez willingly shoots this dude, and nothing is ever pursued due to the fact that it was actually ruled self-defense. So While it may have been occurred during illegality, it was some sort of fight. Marquez smoked the guy, and he's never indicted because it's deemed that he was protecting himself. I want to kind of talk about the control that Marquez had. By the early 60s, Spanish Raymond had, dozens of numbers banks, and they were all controlled by him. They were out of basically dingy storefronts, small cafes, businesses of sort. And he's making millions by this point. This is in the 60s. He controlled parts of East Harlem, West Harlem, Spanish Harlem, parts of the Bronx. He even had numbers people in New Jersey. I want to kind of talk a little bit about the brief history and, well, actually, not brief history. I want to briefly talk about the long history of the numbers racket. As I said, numbers were big in the Black Renaissance in Harlem. People like Stephanie St. Clair, Dutch Schultz were all big in numbers. Mentioned the Italians. But in Spanish Harlem, we kind of have to look at, let's just say by 1970, when we talk about places like Spanish Harlem, Black Harlem, even like areas of Brooklyn and Queens and other minority neighborhoods, we have to understand how big numbers are, right? And that goes to the amount of money they made. According to a report in 1970, 75% of people ranging from 15 years old to senior citizens in ethnic minority neighborhoods played the illegal lottery. Think about that, 75%. So if we do simple math in terms of how much money people like Spanish Raymond Marquez could make, if every person, it was estimated that every person that played the lottery spent between $3 and $5 a week. Let's just say they spend $3 each person. In 1970 in New York City, there were approximately 1.7 million Blacks and 1.4 million Spanish. So essentially, that's 3-ish million people in 1970. If we figure 75% played, that's 2.3 million. When we look at 2.3 million times $3 a week times 52 weeks, we have to understand that's essentially $360 million a year in illegal numbers. And certain places in Harlem, Brooklyn, they're bringing in multi-millions of dollars a year. It's all illegal. It's all going to people like Spanish Raymond and Fat Tony and Jose Battle and, all these different numbers runners. This is a huge business. Everybody wants to play the lottery. Think of the lottery today. Everybody plays it. Pick 3, pick 4, scratch off tickets, Powerball, Mega Million. All that was illegal. There was no lottery in the early 60s. There was none. It was all illegal. And again, this is how, when you see someone like Fat Tony, this is how he was able to become someone who was the largest earner in the history of the Mafia. And remember, the Genovese family didn't just have Fat Tony. They had Jimmy Napoli in Brooklyn. They had associates like Spanish Raymond in Harlem. This was all going up top. Now, as I said, Spanish Raymond's making tons of money. His brothers, uncles, nephews, even his father were working for him. And by this point, he's a very rich man. We'll get into how rich he was. He would move his family eventually to the area of Great Neck in Long Island. He would build a beautiful home. At one point, it was talked about that Spanish Raymond had a yacht, a 63-foot yacht, and it all came from illegality. Now, it wasn't just numbers that Spanish Raymond was involved in, and this is why we have to regard this as a crime family. This was just like any other crime family. They had hundreds of people below them. They had somewhat of a hierarchy, and the guy at the top, the padrino, was Spanish Raymond. He was, though, kicking up his 5% to Fat Tony. So we think about, let's just say this guy made $50 million a year. I don't have to tell you what 5% is each year. And that's just one numbers runner group. Fat Tony had many of them. Now, it was also said that Spanish Raymond was involved in other rackets as well. And this makes this such a huge organization. It was said that Spanish Raymond had an executive card game, basically a poker game, similar to the one we saw in The Sopranos, where high-end people would come and play poker. Distinguished people, police, government officials, doctors, lawyers. Not just anybody got into this game. And it was said that one of the people that Spanish Raymond was partners with in this game was Huey Mulligan. Now, Huey Mulligan was an Irish gangster, a big bookmaker and loan shark, but he was also said to be a political fixer. And this is what allowed, again, when you talk about powerful people in the mafia or organized crime, when you become really powerful is when you have police under you, government officials under you, congressional people, district people. And this is allowing Spanish Raymond to become connected. He gets police under him. He's paying off judges. And this allows him to operate at a very high level. It was also said that Spanish Raymond, he had people moving heroin, had girls, prostitution networks. And he also, this is where he meets Frank Black Caesar Matthews. We know Pee Wee Matthews. I've done a podcast on Pee Wee Matthews. He is, to me, probably the most interesting criminal ever in this country, at least in my opinion. He is the biggest drug dealer in the history of this country, born in this country. I'm not talking about Griselda Blanco or Pablo Escobar. People born in this country, there was no bigger than Frank Matthews. And one of his close friends was Spanish Raymond Marquez. Now, this all leads to loan sharking and extortion and other gambling. Spanish Raymond also had about 400 people working under him. He had up to 30 controlled stores that were all submitting action to him. And at one point, it was estimated that one numbers bank could bring in $100,000 a day. It was also discussed that in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, we would regularly see Spanish Raymond Marquez meeting not only in surveillance with Fat Tony Salerno, but Fonzie Thierry and people like Buckaloo Farrow. So again, very accomplished dude. He's an associate of the mafia. This guy is regarded just like any other dude was. He's the Joe Watts of the Genovese family, really. That's what he is for the mafia. Now, he didn't have quite the relationship. He didn't only work for the mafia. He was also, in a way, bigger than the mafia, at least in the Spanish world. He was able to work freely and not have to work under them. He wasn't an employee, if you will, like a Joe Watts was. Joe Watts only worked for the mafia and had to kick up and do all that stuff. Spanish Raymond could freely move. He just had to submit a percentage, which was small. In 1968, though, it would come undone a little bit for Spanish Raymond Marquez. He would be arrested by the feds on gambling charges and be hit with a 3 to 5 year prison sentence. He would ultimately do about 5 years and be released in 1975. He would head right back to the streets and continue operating. It really didn't matter that by the early 70s, the New York lottery was around. Again, and understand, if you were an old school Puerto Rican living in Spanish Harlem, you don't give a shit about the New York lottery. You're going to your local bodega, you go into the back, and you're playing the Spanish numbers. You're not playing the lottery. All these bodegas, where do you think they're kicking up to? Spanish Raymond. All the info is going to Spanish Raymond. Most ethnic people, minorities, want to play ethnic stuff. You go to Brighton Beach, they want to go to a Russian bathhouse. They want to go to a Russian coffee shop. They want to go to a Russian numbers racket. It's real pretty simple. And that's why, again, the Italian mafia was able to run, because when you're in ethnic communities, again and again, you want to deal with your people. It's very simple. Now, upon getting released, he would head back to Harlem. And in 1977, Spanish Raymond Marquez would actually be kidnapped. A lot of information is really mum about this, but he would be released after a ransom was paid by his wife. Now, Spanish Raymond would eventually buy a home in Florida, as well as I said, that yacht. He would also acquire hotels and businesses, not only in Florida, but in Long Island. He would also acquire a ton of property that he is probably still making money off of today, he and his family. Now, his numbers rackets were out of places like this. He would operate out of places like this: La Oficina Bar and Restaurant, dingy storefronts that you would never suspect. But this is something that the mob did, and people like Raymond Marquez did. Now, according to Raymond Marquez, he would earn all of his money from what he would call legitimate income. And for a long time, the feds were able to prove otherwise. Now, by the 80s, the lottery was introduced, but it still didn't really matter. Raymond not only had his hands in illegal businesses, but by this point, he's making a ton of money through legal business. That's the great sign of a great criminal, taking illegal money and investing it in legal things. Now, ultimately, the stuff would ultimately come out for Marquez. When we say the stuff, we mean the federal government. By the 90s, they were building a case on Spanish Raymond. They wanted to put him away. In fact, this is something that in the 90s, Raymond Marquez would have to deal with a lot. He was pursued regularly by people like Robert Morgenthau, the Manhattan district attorney. They wanted to take Raymond Marquez off the street. Now, Raymond Marquez on the street was regarded as a Robin Hood. Everybody loved him. He gave people jobs. He made money for people. He was a industry. And when we look at ethnic neighborhoods again, what are the forms of capitalism in these areas? Numbers businesses, the drug trade, loan sharking. When you look at a neighborhood today in 2023, let's go to North Philadelphia. Do you know what the biggest form of capitalism in North Philadelphia is? The drug trade. Pretty simple. Same thing with Spanish Harlem. Raymond Marquez was looked at as a god. He employed people, and he didn't feel like he was really doing anything wrong. He was providing entertainment for people. Now, the government didn't view him like that, and they wanted him. In 1995, Raymond Marquez would be indicted in a 221 count indictment, essentially saying that he was part of a RICO conspiracy. Now, according to his son, David, who would become his lawyer, David would become a lawyer in the mid 80s and take on his father's cases. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the popcorn headlines that the New York City Police Department was able to get from Raymond Marquez's arrest. They did one of those big sweeping, like 500 police officers. They descend and raid on like 30 or 40 different places. I think in the end, they hit like 70 different institutions. They arrest like 80 people. They confiscate all this money. You know, the typical big raids they do. You see them on the news. And they wanted to make Raymond Marquez a headline. In 1996, ultimately, his lawyer's son did a great job, and he would plead guilty to smaller charges like corruption, enterprise corruption, and promoting gambling. In the end, Raymond Marquez would be hit with a 90-day prison sentence and a $1 million fine. But it didn't matter. For years, Raymond Marquez was making $20 to $30 million a year in numbers alone. So it really didn't matter. He had money coming everywhere. We don't know the net worth of Raymond Marquez, but it is a lot, put it that way. He was sitting on a small fortune, and it all came from numbers. Now, the feds wouldn't stop going after Raymond Marquez. In 1998, he would be hit again with a 52 count indictment after a 1-year NYPD investigation. Now, according to the NYPD, they felt like they had Raymond Marquez dead to rights because they saw him in Harlem at number spots, in surveillance, telephone records. But again, Spanish Raymond's son, what an argument this is. He claims that the reason his father, through circumstantial evidence, was at these places was because he was doing research for his autobiography he was going to write, and that he had to go to these places and talk to people because they were just part of the book he was writing in his life. In the end, it worked. Spanish Raymond would beat the rap and was acquitted. How about that? This young lawyer, David, his son, what a lawyer he is. Now, by 2001, according to Spanish Raymond, he would retire from the numbers business. According to him, he was sick and tired of being pursued by Robert Morgenthau. You can understand by this point, Raymond Marquez is tired of the government. He's tired of them coming after him. He keeps beating them. They're getting sick of it. So he just says, you know what? I got plenty of money. I'm out. Now, what he would do to get back at the NYPD and the state of New York for all of his constant persecution is he would sue them. Now, according to Raymond Marquez and according to his father or his son, David, they would sue the state or the city of New York for $15 million. Now, this has to do with a pretty interesting defense. According to Marquez, during his incarceration at places like Rikers Island and the Tombs in Manhattan, Marquez claims that during his time there, he developed bladder cancer from secondhand cigarette smoke he inhaled due to a poor ventilation system at these institutions like the Tombs, and that he had not inhaled deeply when he smoked many years ago. And that's not why he got cancer. It didn't matter that Raymond Marquez smoked for 3 decades. He claims in the 70s he quit and that his cancer came from poor ventilation in the penal system in New York City. He would sue the government. In 2008, he would lose, but it was a good try from Raymond Marquez. In the end, Raymond Marquez, since the late 2000s, early 2010s, has been pretty quiet. He runs his hotels in Long Island and Florida. And he was even targeted in 2011 by the government again for failed to pay $1.6 million in business taxes. Now, at one point, Raymond Marquez to this day is regarded as one of the biggest scofflaws in New York City. Now, according to Raymond Marquez, he would tell the government that he is, quote, never paying the taxes, and they're welcome to do what they have to do, but he's never paying them. We can understand he hates the government, and good for him. He does what he has to do. Raymond Marquez is still alive, and he is 93 years old. He made a fortune in numbers. He was respected by the Mafia, and in fact was one of the biggest moneymakers to Tony Salerno, and he was never even a made member. He was a Genovese associate, if you will, but he ran legitimately his own crime family. He gave jobs. He had hundreds of people working under him, and he didn't even do that much prison time, 5-ish years, 6 years maybe, and he's still alive today. In my estimation, Raymond Marquez is one of the most interesting people in New York City crime history. Boy, would I love to see some sort of film or documentary about him. If he's out there, David, the son, you want to speak to me? Let me know. I would love to speak to you. It's funny, though. I'll end it with this. The one person that did not go into criminality was David, the son of Raymond Marquez. At one point, Raymond Marquez would actually say that he didn't want his son in this world. He wanted him to be a good kid and do something with his life. And they had a long relationship as lawyer-client, but who better to defend you than your son? As always, thank you for watching. We'll see you next week here on the